independence. Nothing against you at all. I'm not criticizing you. I'm just wondering if we've got the right structure, particularly with an entity that's costing taxpayers so much money. And so that's a great big red flag here. And also, I have to observe the number of times that you requested funds. Probably at least 3 times in this testimony I heard you say we're asking for a number of funds. So I just suggest to the panel that doesn't reek of independence. And I think that if we really want a more efficient government, the folks that we have overseeing it and reporting back to Congress should truly be independent. And so I'm hoping that that we can pursue this in some manner. My last question is really because the talk is that the United States Postal Service is not funded by the taxpayer, that it somewhat stands independent. But when I look at the fact that we've got losses year after year, those losses have to be backfilled by capital from somewhere. So could you describe to this panel what are the source of funds for operating capital in the years where we run deficits?
Yeah, that's a great question. The Postal Service is very cash-oriented business, as you can imagine. The long-term liabilities are very significant for the Postal Service. So in many cases, when the Postal Service runs a deficit, it is not contributing to some of those long-term liabilities, like some of the retirement fund liabilities they are not making the contributions to those that they would make if they did not run a loss. So that's the short answer. There's a longer answer, and we can get back to you and your staff. And I would love to talk to your staff more about that independence thing as well. So,
thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Now recognize the gentlewoman from Washington, Mrs. Glusenkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brave attempt at Glusenkamp. We're doing great. My name's Marie. Glad to meet you. So my background, we used to run an auto repair shop, and one of the things that you know about if you're working in, have you ever heard of the term Kia boys?
No.
So is this phenomena where, like, basically they've, these keyless entry cars, they can dupe the signal, and you can, like, buy the dupe online. And some of these Kias have become uninsurable in certain cities. Like, the theft rates are just, like, off the charts. There's a real problem. And we're seeing that in other things. Just like the idea that technology is going to solve a problem is often, it's kind of a false hope. So this is kind of intersecting with another issue, which is I live in a really rural community. We are losing our pharmacies hand over fist. And so more and more, and we're an older population. So we have more and more people who are getting their prescriptions through the mail. I've heard about a shift to using digital keys on U.S. postal boxes. And I'm wondering, I know that, like, there's a high incentive to get into those boxes if you're trying to steal prescription drugs. And I also know that, when there is a, right now I know if you get one key, you get a certain set of boxes. If you get the digital key, I'm just wondering what you have learned in the implementation of these digital key systems, what the capacity is for shifting to a dual, analog and digital, what you're hearing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. We've done some work on mail theft in general and how the Postal Service is responding broadly to mail theft. Our own jurisdiction as it relates to mail theft is internal mail theft by postal employees.
Yeah.
The inspection service has the rest of it, which is
Yeah.
significant. And
Yeah.
so we've done a lot of work in different areas of the country to look at how they're rolling out some of the keys that you're talking about. I think they there's multiple different solutions there. And I think some of them are more two-factor authenticated, multi-factor authenticated than others. And so we're looking at that in some of our audit work. I don't know specifically what we found, or if I don't believe we found any of that duplication that you're talking about yet, but I could see it as a potential problem and something that we will be looking at as we move forward and as they roll out different technologies in that space.
You know, it's like once you reach a certain scale, there's such a strong incentive for criminal actors. And so it's like you can think it's okay till you get all the way in the water. And so like I would just urge you to look at other models where that has led to profound, marginal rate of return for criminal actors and stealing my community's very necessary prescription drugs. Another question I had, mail carriers are like right up there with firefighters, right? Like they are a really critical linchpin in people having a sense of community. I remember reading a study that people who know the name of their mail carrier live an additional 3 years. Like just the sense of community connection and all of these ancillary things are critical to having a sense of a democratic country, nation where we know each other and have a system of laws and order. So as you're making, but we're seeing changes in delivery times, and we're seeing a lot of, I think what Mr. Bocan was getting at here with rural communities being sites for efficiency, but they're critical for our sense of community and for rural businesses. Every business that ships out is really relying on these. So I'm wondering, what other options are there besides cutting down service that rural communities rely on to keep costs down without impacting delivery times for our packages?
Yeah, I think obviously there are general efficiencies in the system, trying to identify more effective or efficient ways of doing business. I'm not sure that those are significant enough. That we identify probably about $1 billion a year in efficiencies to be gained in the system, and also potential revenue, additional revenue to be gained. The Postal Service is losing more than that in its finances, and so they're making some trade-offs. I'm not, I know that there's concern about some of the trade-offs that they're making, some of the decisions that we're making, and we at the OIG have similar concerns. We want to make sure that service is maintained in rural America the way that it needs to be maintained. I think some of those choices are going to be some of the difficult things moving forward for the Postal Service as it looks at its financial condition and determines. But we've also identified some structural issues, and I want to point to those. Those are larger and maybe more challenging because they'll require legislation to fix, but there are some opportunities in those larger structural areas, and we can talk more about that if your staff is interested.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce. I appreciate that welcomed introduction. It's my job on this side of the aisle to back cleanup for us. I'm the fourth person to go here. We've talked about a couple of different important issues, and I appreciate you being with us today. I want to talk a little about safety of our letter carriers, because since 2020, over 2,000 carriers have been assaulted or robbed, often for the arrow keys that Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez was talking about, that unlock dozens of mailboxes, opening the door to identity theft and financial fraud. Shockingly, and this is crazy to me, a mere 14% of those incidents wind up becoming prosecuted. In one case, a carrier was robbed at gunpoint, and the criminal got just 30 days. I think the safety of our postal workers shouldn't depend on geography or a prosecutor's discretion like that. It must be a national standard backed by serious consequences. Ms. Hull, are you aware of the Protect Our Letter Carriers Act, H.R. 1065?
Yes.
I'm a proud co-sponsor of this legislation that would strengthen postal workers' safety by funding secure replacements for those arrow keys. It would increase penalties for assaults on carriers, and it would require each U.S. Attorney's Office to designate a prosecutor to address the current 86% non-prosecution rate. Based on your experience, the job that you're in, and your position, do you believe these provisions would help reduce the incidence of assaults on letter carriers?
It seems that they would. I don't, I haven't analyzed the legislation to that level, but we have big concerns as well. We have more than half of our staff is law enforcement, and we work with the inspection service on many of the cases that we start. Oftentimes, we're not sure at the beginning of a case whether it's an external or an internal or both that have collaborated on committing criminal activity. So we're supportive of the inspection service and in its efforts to prosecute these cases.
Great. I'm a little biased. I sponsor the legislation, so I think it will help. But tell us, based upon your experience and your position, what else can and should be done to help increase the safety of our letter carriers?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think making sure that there is good supervision, that supervisors know their letter carriers and that they're very attentive to their needs.
Security recipients of America, the Medicare recipients of America, the veterans of America, and so many others.
A yes vote means the amendment will be placed on the table and no longer considered for passage. I shall be voting yes. The clerk to call the roll.
Senator Rakowski. Senator
Aye
Paul.
by proxy.
Senator Mullen.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Collins.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Scott. Rakowski.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Hawley.
Aye
Senator
by
Mullen.
proxy. Aye by proxy.
Senator Marshall.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Senator Banks. Scott.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Hawley.
Aye by
Senator
proxy.
Keested. Senator Tupperville.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Banks. Moody.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Keested. Senator Sanders. Senator Murray. Senator Moody.
Aye
Senator
by
Baldwin.
proxy.
Senator Sanders. Murphy. Senator Murray. Senator Kane. Senator Baldwin. Senator Hassan. Senator Murphy. Senator Hickenlooper. Senator Kane. Senator Markey. Senator Hassan. Senator Kim. Senator Blunt Rochester. Senator Hickenlooper. Senator Alsop.
Congressman and Chairman Mike McCall and now Chairman Brian Mast are champions for reform, assisted by Ranking Member Greg Meeks. And Secretary, what changes do you believe should be made to streamline the process?
I wouldn't assert that I have any great authority or, ideas on that. I support the idea of streamlining it. Certainly, I share your concern about the delays that we've witnessed over time. I had to deal.
They failed to make us more respected around the world. But their biggest failure is this: they have failed to appreciate the strength of the American people. During the dawn of the Republic, it was once observed that when people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. Donald Trump and Republicans thought they could shock and awe us into submission. They thought we would be too complacent to stand up for liberty and justice for all. They thought we would walk away from the principle of equal protection under the law. They thought wrong. They thought wrong. They thought wrong. Trump's unconstitutional assault on the American way of life is unprecedented. But the so-called dictator on day one is learning an important lesson. Americans don't bend the knee to bullies. In the face of tyranny, we join together. In the face of tyranny, we rise up together. In the face of tyranny, we get into some good trouble together. And we're just getting started. 100 days in, Donald Trump has the lowest approval rating of any president in modern American history. 100 days in, voters have elected Democrats in Republican-held districts all across the country, including in Iowa and Pennsylvania. 100 days in, Elon Musk spent $25 million to buy a state Supreme Court seat in Wisconsin and lost by double digits. 100 days in, more than 200 different lawsuits have been filed against the unconstitutional and unlawful executive orders of Donald Trump. And the American people are winning in court. 100 days in, principled opposition to Republican extremism is taking shape from sea to shining sea. The American people are rising up and making it clear that the Trump administration has a lot to fear. When my oldest son, JJ, was 9 years old, he played travel baseball with a group of his friends. Many of you know that travel sports can be taxing on the schedule. It's a labor of love for our children. During the season, it seems like almost every weekend, for several months, you're on the road. And so this one particular Memorial Day weekend, JJ had a baseball tournament in a little town off the beaten path somewhere in the Northeast. Travel sports can take you to some interesting places. I decided to make it a road trip and bring my youngest son, Joshua, with us. He was just 6 years old at the time. And so I said to him, he's going to come on this trip and it'll be like a vacation. What did I say that for, y'all? When I mentioned vacation, he had visions of Atlantis. So we pulled up to the motel where we were staying, and the situation was a bit shaky. My 6-year-old son looked at the motel, looked at me, looked at the motel, looked at me, and said, "Dad, is this where we're staying?" I said, "Yes, Joshua. Why do you ask?" He responded, "Oh my God, Dad, this is a debacle." 6 years old, I looked at him and said, "What does the word debacle mean?" He responded quickly. He said, "I don't know, Dad. It's something bad." This is the moment we are in right now in the United States of America, with Donald Trump and the Republicans in charge. Crashing the economy is something bad. Destroying Medicaid as we know it is something bad. Taking a chainsaw to Social Security is something bad. Raising costs on hard-working American taxpayers is something bad. Firing federal workers, including thousands of veterans who served this country, is something bad. Canceling medical research for children with cancer is something bad. Destroying the retirement accounts of everyday Americans is something bad. Trying to whitewash the most painful parts of our history is something bad. Targeting law-abiding immigrant families is something bad. Undermining the rule of law is something bad. The first 100 days of the Trump administration have been a debacle. Enough. Enough. America is better than this. When the new Congress began in January, Democrats were prepared to get to work in a bipartisan way. The Trump administration chose a different path. Far-right Republicans are tearing America apart, targeting our democratic way of life, and tarnishing our reputation as the land of the free. It is wrong, and we will continue to push back aggressively. Donald Trump and the Republicans in Congress have given us 100 days of chaos, 100 days of cruelty, and 100 days of corrupt behavior. That is not constructive leadership. It's a recipe for disaster. The American people deserve common sense leadership. The American people deserve compassionate leadership. The American people deserve courageous leadership that changes things for the better. Our message to the American people is simple. We hear you, we see you, we feel you. Democrats are determined to make life better for you. Donald Trump and his sycophants spent yesterday bragging about the speed with which they've moved during these first 100 days. They're right. Never has a president failed so spectacularly, so often, so quickly as Donald Trump. The White House referred to its strategy for the first 100 days as shock and awe. Well, they're half right. It is shocking how rapidly this administration collapsed into chaos, cruelty, and corruption. It's shocking how quickly MAGA Republicans turned their backs on working class Americans. It is shocking how spineless Republicans have been in the United States Congress. And it is shocking and tragic and infuriating how much damage Donald Trump and the Republican Party's policies have already done. Here's the thing. They expected us to step back. But the American people are here to fight back. On the campaign trail, Donald Trump promised to end inflation. He promised to lower costs on day one. When he was asking for your vote, Donald Trump told you he would make life more affordable for everyday Americans. Now that he's in office, it's a different story. In March, President Trump was asked if he was worried that car prices would go up because of his tariffs. His reply, I couldn't care less. The cost of living in the United States is too high, America is too expensive, and Donald Trump couldn't care less. He couldn't care less that housing costs are too high. He couldn't care less that grocery costs are too high. He couldn't care less that child care costs are too high. He couldn't care less that health insurance costs are too high. He couldn't care less that utility costs are too high. Donald Trump couldn't care less. Prices everywhere are too high, and Donald Trump couldn't care less. 100 days in, Donald Trump is making life harder for you and your family. And every day, his costly tariffs stay in place. Life in America gets more expensive. American families will pay thousands of dollars more per year. Small businesses are shutting down. Corporations are not hiring. Businesses are unable to invest because of the uncertainty that has been created. Inflation is on the rise, life is getting more expensive, and the reckless economic policies of Donald Trump and House Republicans are driving us toward a recession. Republicans in Congress could put a stop to this insanity at any time. Since they won't, next November, we will. Yes, we will. Yes, we will. Which brings me to Elon Musk. I knew he would get that reaction. We all agree that government should be more efficient. But like most things in life, there's the American way, and then there's the cruel way. 100 days in, it's clear that DOGE is not the American way. Canceling medical research for children with cancer is cruel. Denying relief for communities reeling from natural disasters is cruel. Firing thousands of our veterans, like Joseph Quintanilla of Virginia, who served this country in the Marines, is cruel. But their cruelty doesn't stop there. Republicans actually believe that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, and they want to take a chainsaw to it. During the first 100 days of the Trump administration, Social Security has faced an unprecedented attack. Social Security offices have been closed, wait times have dramatically increased, and people are being denied access to benefits that they have earned. Republicans continue to insist that Social Security is an entitlement program. They think they are entitled to destroy it. When I was 15 years old, I got my working papers and secured my first job. I was a messenger dropping off packages from office building to office building in Midtown Manhattan. My salary was $3.35 per hour. That was the minimum wage back in the day. And I thought that I had made it big. Particularly upon learning that as a high school student who worked part-time, I wouldn't have to pay any income tax. So I couldn't wait to get my first check. On a piece of paper, I multiplied $3.35 by the number of hours I expected to work during my first pay period. I figured out the total, and in my mind, that money was already spent. I couldn't wait to go to Albee Square Mall in downtown Brooklyn and get some new sneakers so I could dress like Run DMC. But then the check came, and some money was missing. I had two questions, y'all. Who is FICA? And why is he taking my money? Here's what I learned. All of us pay the FICA tax in connection with Social Security and Medicare. We pay the FICA tax on our first job. We pay the FICA tax on our last job. We pay the FICA tax on every single job we have throughout our lifetime. Social Security and Medicare are not entitlement programs, they are earned benefits. Earned benefits. You work hard for those benefits, pay into those benefits, and deserve those benefits. They are earned benefits. Democrats will make sure that Donald Trump and House Republicans keep their hands off your Social Security and your Medicare. Hands off today, hands off tomorrow, hands off this week, hands off next week, hands off this month, hands off next month, hands off this year, hands off next year, hands off Social Security and Medicare forever. 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 Now, if this administration actually had some common sense, it would look at the damage that it's done, the rejection from the people, the historic unpopularity of this president, and they would change course. But Donald Trump is doubling down. And instead of being a check and balance on this president's abuse of power, Republicans in Congress are nothing more than a rubber stamp for his extreme agenda. Recently, I met a woman named Mary Beth. She lives in Canton, North Carolina, a town of 4,400 people that is still rebuilding from Hurricane Helene. She has custody of her 4 grandchildren, ages 10
to continue this debate. To stop this committee.
Will you
This is
waive
an
the 2-hour
important
rule?
issue. People are
Well, I
prepared to
waived-
come
I don't
back
have
on
the
another
authority
day
to waive the
to
rule.
continue
Call up
this
Mr.
debate. Call up your
Will you
your
waive the
leader,
2-hour rule?
Mr. Thune. Well, I
Well,
waived.
it
I don't
was
have the authority to
Senator
waive the rule. Call up
Schumer
Mr.
who refused
Call
it.
up your leader. This is nothing new. We've gone.
Well,
This
it
has gone on
was
for years.
we have time for
Senator
2 more
Schumer.
minutes who refused
Call
it.
up Mr. Schumer. But this is nothing new. We've gone. This has gone on for years.
We have time for 2 more minutes.
Well, we certainly want to get a vote on where are we now? On my amendment, yeah. Well, we
Why
certainly
can't we
want to
just
get a vote.
come back to,
on-
why can't we just,
where
listen,
are we now?
you are
On my
you are
amendment, yeah.
hearing Nadia, why can't we just come back to, why can't we, listen, you are hearing.
Senator Sanders, are you ready with your amendment?
Why can't we just come back tomorrow to continue the market? This is an incredibly serious.
Senator Sanders, the minority should have allowed us longer than 2 hours. Senator Sanders, do you have an amendment?
This is an incredibly serious.
Then the minority should have allowed us longer than 2 hours. Senator Sanders, do you have an amendment?
In other words, there would be freedom of debate.
What's the reason we can't do this?
Because then you would Senator Sanders, do you have an amendment, and then it wouldn't happen.
In other words, there would be freedom of debate.
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment.
So Senator Sanders, do you have an amendment?
I call up my amendment, also Brooks number 1.
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
And ask for the yeas and nays.
I call up my
amendment, also Brooks number 1.
I want to begin by underscoring that
anti-Semitism is a very real and rising threat in our country. I want to begin by underscoring that anti-Semitism is a very real and rising threat in our country. We need any act of federal government form of discrimination is unacceptable and must combat hate in all forms. We need whether that federal government toward the Jewish community and resources or whether that hate combat hate in all forms. LGBTQ students or individuals with disabilities, or whether that hate be directed toward the black.
They consolidate the returns, and Kansas City is in one of those, and we've seen problems related to both just the congestion and also the challenges with employees potentially stealing from the returns that come in.
I have 10 seconds left, basically. I highly encourage the Postal Service to get its workforce straightened out, its hiring practices. I visited with a postmaster there in my district. This person was in tears because the hiring practices, it's done over the internet. They hire people, they come in for the job. It's not what they thought it was going to be, and they can't retain anyone. I think that's part of the issue. With that, I yield back, sir.
Thank you, sir. Since there seems to be some interest, we'll start a second round here of questions, and I'll acknowledge myself yet again. If I'm not mistaken, the Postal Service, when they deployed a 10-year strategic plan, Delivering for America plan, projected significant overall savings for the Postal Service. In 2024, your office audited the Delivery for America's financial projections. As you know, the plan projected positive net income for the Postal Service starting in FY 2023. Contrary to those projections, actual results show net losses, including $6.5 billion in 2023. Can you, General Hull, explain why Postal Service's financials deviating from the DFA's predictions? And has the Postal Service updated its projection after reviewing your findings? And what can we expect in future years?
Yeah, in that report, the Postal Service indicated to us that inflation had a significant impact on their financials. And we looked at that and did find that inflation had an impact. But we also found that work hour reductions, which is what saves the money on the salaries and benefits side, were not occurring as quickly as they had projected. And as a result, a lot of the savings that they had intended to get out of the DFA were not being experienced. They believe they might be delayed, but we saw that they had not yet been experienced. So we did recommend, as you said, that the Postal Service, we said that the financials that they put together, in fairness, during the middle of a pandemic, so they put together these financial projections. We said, things have changed dramatically since then. So we recommended that they update their financial projections so that Congress and others can be clear on when they expect to get in a better financial place. Thus far, the Postal Service has not released, at least publicly, financial projections that are into the future, like they did with their first Delivering for America plan.
Wasn't it fair to say that it's a wild deviation from being in the profit to being a $5 billion loss?
Yes.
And you say most of that is failure to maintain overtime, I guess, is what you're saying? The people are working too much, or they weren't curbing the...
No, some of it was inflation. Some of it was the issues with them not being able to reduce their work hours as quickly as they had planned to. And then there's a segment of this that inflation has an impact on, in that the Postal Service calls it non-controllable, or they have a controllable section and a non-controllable section. Basically, in the non-controllable section, it's mostly impacts on some of those large liabilities that I talked about earlier, the CSRS and the FERS retirement benefits, as well as the workers' comp programs. Those are in what they call non-controllable, because inflation and higher interest rates in those places has significant impacts on losses or gains, depending on the financials, basically. So they have a controllable and a non-controllable. It's complicated. The Postal Service financials are kind of difficult sometimes to decipher, but yes, they clearly were far from what they originally projected, which is why we believe that it would be very beneficial to them to come out with additional new projections.
Do you think it'd be beneficial to deviate from the original Delivering for America plan to something that works?
I think that obviously there have been many issues in execution of that plan. So I think looking at the plan is not a bad thing to see if there are needs to change the direction.
Recognize Mr. Hoyer for any questions he may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Do they call you General Hull?
You can call me whatever you would like.
No, I can't do that. I wouldn't do that. But in any event, Ms. Hull, can you tell me how many pieces of mail are delivered daily by the United States Postal Service?
It's in the millions and millions and millions. I don't have that number with me, but I can get it to you.
Well, it's well into the hundreds of millions. And your job is to oversee, in part, the efficiency and effectiveness of the operations, correct? What I'm interested in, and I've discussed this before with the Postal Service some time ago, when, like Bishop, it was the Treasury Postal Committee, and we did have jurisdiction over the service itself. Do you have any knowledge of whether efficiency vis-a-vis hundreds of millions of pieces of mail being delivered on time at the right site to the person that was the addressee, vis-a-vis the mistakes and the slowness of delivery? In other words, have we gotten less efficient, more efficient, stayed the same? Is that part of your analysis that you do?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we have done that analysis. We've tracked things like service over time, trending in service. I think one of the challenges the Postal Service faces is that mail volume, as significant as it is, has declined pretty significantly over time. And we have a paper that's coming out probably in the next month or so that talks about mail declines over time and projections into the future of what that could look like, because you have to think about that as you move forward and determine how to size your network and where you need staff and things like that.
In many respects, that's due to digital communications.
Right.
Yeah. I'd like to get some sense, and by the way, I think our committee also has an interest in what you say reporting to the Oversight Committee in terms of that, because to some degree that impacts on our responsibilities as well, and yours. I want to go to DOJ that met with you. Was there, at any time, was there a discussion about any study that related to the complement of federal employees or postal employees that were needed to do the job that was expected of them? In other words, what I'm saying, was there anything which DOJ or you based your analysis on the proper level? I happen to believe the government needs to be right-sized. And whatever we ask them to do, they need the right number of people to do it. And if we don't want to do it, we need to cut the number of employees. But I have not heard of any studies on which DOJ is relying to come to a level of employment, particularly when you send 2 million people a notice that you can quit if you want, and we'll pay you for the next 6 months. Do you know of any such study, and was any discussed?
I am not aware of any study, and we did not discuss that when we met with them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now recognize the gentlewoman from Iowa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the second round. I want to move on to facilities and kind of some of the current concerns we have there. In December 2024, then Postmaster General DeJoy claimed over 31,000 facilities were in shockingly horrible condition with over $20 billion in deferred maintenance. And so my biggest concern with this is I am worried about not only the conditions for the workforce, but also for executing their jobs effectively. So do you think that these deferred maintenance issues and the, frankly, ill-equipped buildings are actually slowing down services for the American people?
What we've seen as we go out and do our work, I talked about that when we go out and do local work where we do a plant and delivery units around it, we see lots and lots of issues with deferred maintenance, lots of issues with ceilings falling down or broken things in the parking lot, potentially safety issues to some degree. So we have launched a job that we're in the middle of right now that looks at deferred maintenance more broadly across the Postal Service, and we hope to issue that probably in 3 or 4 months. So we'll know more when we look at it broadly. We just know kind of the individual situations that we've seen that are pretty shocking in some places.
Well, certainly we want to make sure we're reaching, if those facilities are in my district, I want to make sure we're getting on them to get those things fixed, and that we're prioritizing safety. And how are you going through those investigations? You mentioned you're going to have a report out in a couple of months. How are you going through that process to provide then hopefully recommendations to USPS?
Yeah, we'll be looking. We're doing field visits. I think we've been to I think we've been to Dallas, New York, and maybe Boston so far. But we're also incorporating what we see when we go out and do the local work into that job. But we're looking at the processes, right? The Postal Service should have processes for reporting when things are broken so that they can be fixed. This is not something that they haven't done for many years. They may have neglected it or they may not have put the money towards it. But it needs, these things should have been reported and should have been fixed. We'll look at timeliness of addressing issues when they are reported. We'll look to see if there are issues that haven't been reported, kind of the entire process to see, and we'll make recommendations to improve in that area.
Okay. Are there any recommendations you've already made to USPS that they have not implemented properly, or things that could significantly improve service along the way?
Yeah. On the deferred maintenance, I'm not aware of any that are still open. When we go out and look at the individual plants and delivery units, we will make recommendations locally to address the things. For example, if we see a broken toilet or a ceiling that's falling down or poor working conditions, things like that for employees or customers, we'll make recommendations for fixes there, and generally they handle those pretty quickly. But I mean, there are, 30,000 or so places around the country we can't be in, many of them. So
I would be interested do you have any district by district or maybe even state level data that you could share with me specifically for Iowa? But I'd be interested in seeing those breakdowns.
Definitely.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Edwards from North Carolina for his next set of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hull, I'll shift gears just a little bit too. My district, NC11, was hit on September 27th by Hurricane Helene, probably the most devastated district across the southeast from that hurricane. We've got a number of post offices that were destroyed that are still inoperable. Constituents are getting antsy. In many cases, folks have to drive up to an hour to get to the closest post office. What can I take back home and give them some confidence that those post offices, those facilities are getting the attention from the folks up here in Washington, D.C. that they deserve? And could you share any sort of process that you might have in prioritizing which facilities are looked at first?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll address your last question first and then get into kind of the suspended post office situation. Generally, when we're deciding where to go and look in those local projects, we look mostly at service level data. We look at how the community is being served in the service scores, whether there are routes that are not being delivered, things like that. We haven't, I don't believe, incorporated post office suspensions into that. That might be a good thing for us to incorporate. But to get to your question about the post offices in North Carolina. That's something that I will take back, and we'll see. We have done, as I told Congressman Mr. LaLota, that we have done work on post office suspensions in the past. I don't know how long it has been, but we'll go back and look to see if that's something that we should do again, and if so, we'll incorporate the work there. We did go during the election process because the hurricane came through right, I think in October, late September, October. We did go out and look to see how the post offices in your district were handling that, because there were some concerns about voting by mail and how that was going to be impacted. So we did do some visits there in that election cycle, but it's something that we could go back and revisit.
I'll just say thank you. I'm definitely going to have my staff follow back up with
Sure.
you, but because it was 7 months ago that
Right.
we were hit by this storm, and we still got post offices that are not operable. Folks are getting impatient, and they deserve the service that they had before. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Now recognize Mr. Alford. You've done very well here. You got in, now you're getting 2 lightning rounds in. And
No, I love it. Thank you. Appreciate that. I love having the second round. We can dig a little bit deeper. And thank you, General Halford, again. I don't know if you covered this because I was in small business. Did you talk about the local transportation optimization in your testimony?
We did speak a little bit about it,
Okay.
yes.
Can you delve into that? Explain how this works and why, when you did your audit in, I think, Virginia, it showed an 86% of the zip codes affected by the LTO plan were in rural areas, and that service performance went down significantly in the weeks following that. How is that affecting my district in rural Missouri?
Yeah, when the Postal Service decided to do this, basically what it is doing is it used to go, the Postal Service used to go out at the end of every day and pick up mail that had come into the post office
Right.
during the day, and then bring it back in the evening at night to be run at the processing plant. Oftentimes, at least according to the Postal Service, there wasn't a lot of mail there, and it was costing a good bit of money to do those routes. And so what they have decided to do is, instead of doing that evening route to all of these post offices, they would pick up that mail in the morning when they bring the mail to the carriers to be sorted and delivered. So instead of doing 2 or sometimes more than 2 stops a day at a post office, they're just going to do the one in the morning. So what that generally does in many of those locations is add at least a partial delivery day, to some degree a full delivery day on that mail. The Postal Service maintains that the LTO that they did was a pilot project, and they did it in, I believe, 15 locations around the country. And then they filed a service standard change to add a day of a delivery to the service standard for those locations that would be
cover
impacted.
that loss.
Yes.
How much money did that save in doing that?
Well, it's just rolled out, I believe, in April, early April. I think they project that there will be several $1 billion of savings annually associated with that. But so far, it's just starting. So that's one thing that we will be looking at, is whether or not those savings are being realized as part of this implementation process. But another thing that we'll be looking at is what the service implications of that are, and whether or not the Postal Service is able to do this, provide this service within the 5 days that they have projected that they will be able to meet. So it's a big change in the postal network, something that could have significant implications.
For my last 2 minutes, I want to go back to the workforce issues. I think this is very important for the stability and long-term survivability of the Postal Service. What changes do you recommend we make in that? The hiring process.
Right. I think that the Postal Service really needs to, when they hire, you can hire quickly, but you can hire badly quickly, and that's not helpful. So I think making sure that when they do bring someone on board, that it's someone that understands the nature of the job and is willing to invest in that. The Postal Service, I think, is a bit of a throwback organization. I have a lot of passion for what they do and how they serve rural America, but it's a tough job. Many of these jobs are very physical and they're very labor intensive, and you don't see a lot of jobs like that in America, at least to the scale the Postal Service has nowadays. And so making sure that people understand what they're getting themselves into when they do come into the Postal Service. But it's also a great career if you know, especially for people that may not want to get a college degree straight out of high school. There's a lot of opportunities that the Postal Service can offer to people in that space. So I think
But they're applying online and they come in and they accept the job and they don't know what the job is, and then they quit when they find out how tough it is.
Yes, exactly. And so making sure that it's clear, talking to a supervisor before you show up on day one.
You got to have a face-to-face
right,
interview at some
right.
point before you.
And
offer
having
it.
the supervisors be upfront about the job, what it entails, how much they're going to need to work. Many of these incoming people have to work, 6 days in a row every week or things like that. It's a tough job. And
Mr. Chair, may I ask one more question? Thank you. Appreciate that. Look, I know the Postal Service is provided for under the Constitution. I don't think should ever be privatized. But are there things that you're looking at in the private sector, processes that Amazon, I mean, you can get things at your doorstep like that. UPS, are you looking at these and trying to adopt the best practices so that we can have the best postal service in the world?
We're looking to see whether the Postal Service is doing those things, exactly what you're saying in our oversight efforts, trying to make sure that the Postal Service is looking outside. Maybe inconsistently. I think in some places they are. I think in some places they could do a better job of looking at private sector best practices and implementing them within their organization.
Because I get the feeling that they don't want to look at that and compare themselves with someone who might be doing a better job. But we each do that. I mean, I look at Ranking Member Hoyer, how I can be a better statesman. We've got to look at our best practices, whether it's our prison system that we're involved in appropriating, whether it's how we function as a body here on Capitol Hill. But I applaud your efforts and your oversight, and we're behind you, and we want to help. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I just follow up with one question, Mr. Alford?
For more praise for yourself?
I appreciate it. He and I became good friends on travel this last week, and we hadn't known each other very well. And I urge everybody in the Congress to travel with one another and leave the shores where we're sort of line up against one another and go when we're American representing our country overseas. And it was a delightful effort to get to know Mr. Alford better and look forward to working with him. And you, Mr. Chairman, of course. Let me ask you something. Has there been an assessment of the postal services of the international community? And if so, where do we rank?
It depends on what the metric is, but yes, we've done some good research work in that space, looking at where the Postal Service fits in the postal community, international postal community, and depending on what you're particularly interested in, we have lots of work in that space that we would love to share. But it is service is one thing, price is another thing. How there's lots of ways to look at the posts and how they compare against each other.
I understand a lot of metrics. Has there been any assessment of where we stand, generally speaking, in the postal services of everybody has a postal service?
Yeah. Again, we've done some. For example, we did some work on looking at first class mail stamp prices and how the Postal Service compared, and actually found that the Postal Service is one of the least expensive posts around the world to mail a first-class letter. We've also, the work that I spoke of earlier on the privatization or the structure thing is the most recent work we've done in that space to look at how the Postal Service compares structurally, financially, what are the universal service obligations that are required for each of the posts. It's a very interesting paper and gets into a lot of what you're talking about.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hoyer. And with that, our hearing has concluded. I'd like to thank General Hull today for being here, for her candor. And there may be some members who would like to submit questions for the record. Please submit any questions for the record to the subcommittee staff within the next 7 days. We stand adjourned. Ms. Hull.
Thank you. Great to see you.
National policy for where we are going as a nation, which would include the backup of hard power to any soft power that we exercise around the world. China is certainly on the march, and they're making moves toward Taiwan. I just returned from Europe, and one of the points we were making to our European allies is when they build infrastructure, such as pipelines, they need to be coordinated with the war plans that General Cavoli is putting in place in NATO and turning NATO into a legitimate war-fighting organization. Yesterday, I held a hearing in the Europe Subcommittee on the cyberspace and digital policy branch of State Department. So I would ask you, Ambassador, for your thoughts on this, and particularly the digital policy here, because it is a part of the hybrid war that we are in now.
Thank you, Congressman, and thanks for the Clausewitz quote. It's one of my favorites. Our flag officers are responsible for the other means. That's their business. Our job is the continuation, that plug in between policy and what the military is doing in the field, the things they blow up, the things, territory they hold, territory they seize. And I found the military is very willing to listen to diplomats in the State Department. But the procedures, be it on the digital account, be it on emerging technologies, be it on new threats, the channels have to be clear-cut. It's very hard to have two battle buddies, and most of our combatant commanders and most of our assistant secretaries are in that situation, and it undercuts the immediate understanding, the sort of mind meld that you get in the field. For example, when I was in Iraq and later in Syria, I had a 3- or 4-star military counterpart in only one, and those officers only had one, it was me, and it worked very, very well. So I do think that that's important. In terms of the new threats, again, we bring the civilian side, which is often very important on these emerging military technologies, again, cyber, digital, all of that stuff. We can bring that to the table, and we can reinforce what the military is doing.
Very good. So for the two ambassadors, where would you put cyberspace and digital policy?
You
Start
mean
with you,
organizationally in the State Department?
Where would you put it?
I think it's really hard, actually. You can have pros and cons for any of the conceivable ideas that I've seen. There was a movement to put it under P, where I served. I didn't think that was a particularly wise idea, partly because I knew I didn't have the skill set, frankly, as undersecretary to really grapple with the cyber threat. It was beyond my experience zone. So I think the first thing, not to skip your answer, I'll come back to it, but the first thing is to make sure we actually have people who can handle it, who have the background. We are diplomats, as Jim said, first and foremost. We also have to have the technical competence to deal with the subject matter at hand, and I don't believe we've been training people to deal with the cyber threat. I would put it under in the T family if forced to make a decision, because again, I think you're more likely to get the kind of people who have the frame of mind to deal with it. It's global in nature, of course, and so that's where I would put it. And I know time is of the essence, but I would just reinforce, in my experience, the coordination between the Foreign Service and embassies and combatant commanders has been superb, and it works far better in the field than DoD state relationships do back here. Not that they're bad, but overseas, I think because we're all on the front lines of whatever we're dealing with, the cooperation and communication is really outstanding.
Very quickly, Ambassador, do you have an idea on CDP organizationally?
Yes, I would agree with David. It should be one of the global bureaus or offices, probably T, but the key thing is those are the kind of global things I like because they provide technical expertise. It's a worldwide problem. It spreads beyond any regional bureau, and they provide support to us like the counterterrorism people do. They don't try to do our job for us or take it away from us or compete with us, and that's very important.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Self. Representative Barra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is my 13th year on this committee, and, why I've always enjoyed the Foreign Affairs Committee in the past, under the guidance of Elliot Engel and Ed Royce, is, we'll have heated debate, but when we're out there abroad, we're representing the United States of America, and I think we're all proud as Democrats and Republicans of who we are as Americans and what we've accomplished. When I'm out there, I do travel a lot, both on this committee as well as on the Intelligence Committee. And I see our brave men and women out there, Foreign Service officers, aid and development folks in conflict zones and refugee camps. And I have the utmost respect for them, as I do for our men and women in military uniform as well, and what they do to both provide the goodwill abroad as the people of the United States, but also to protect our services. So to the three of you, thank you for your service. If I look at the accomplishments of the United States, I'm incredibly proud of what we did post-World War II in creating a world order that created relative peace and prosperity for 75 years, ending the Cold War without actually going to war with the Soviet Union. Many of you were there on the front lines. And that was the military and our diplomatic corps working together. It wasn't Democratic or Republican. We've had, throughout that time, Democratic and Republican administrations. We had a Congress, but we didn't go one way or the other. So I don't think, Mr. Chairman, you'll find a lot of resistance to doing a State Department Authorization Act. But what I would urge is, let's do this in a bipartisan way. We can't make this a Republican authorization bill or a Democratic authorization bill. Look, we're in the minority. I won't say let's meet at the 50-yard line. We'll go to your 40-yard line. But if you take us to the 10-yard line, to your end zone, we're not going to be able to do this. And the challenge there is there's going to be a day when the Democrats are back in the majority. I hope that's in 2026, Chairman Meeks. And if we do this together, then we can actually have something enduring. We're not going to get it all right, but we can get it, mostly right. So we're not constantly every 2-4 years going back and forth. That doesn't serve our interests well. That doesn't serve the world's interests well, because this is a different world. We're in the 21st century now. We've got to do this together. We've got to think about this. I would not go about a reorganization the way President Trump is, but it is what it is. It's creating an opportunity for us to build something better that's more reflective of today's world, to where we have programs that no longer make sense, great. But that doesn't mean we should retreat from the world. We should take the best minds, folks like all three of you who have been on the front line. This committee, as Democrats and Republicans working together, so in 2 years, if we have the gavels, we're not undoing everything and starting from scratch. Let's do something that's lasting, that gets better each time. Let's reaffirm who we are as the Foreign Affairs Committee. Chairman McCall talked about what we do. Yeah, we pass authorization bills, but we always attach it to the NDAA. There's so much that we should have jurisdiction over as the Foreign Affairs Committee that goes into the Pentagon budget. That's not to knock the NDAA, but the NDAA is going to be $1 trillion bill. We don't have to spend more money. We just have to take some of what's in that $1 trillion NDAA, pull it back into our budget, pull it back into where it belongs in a State Department authorization bill. I'm willing to work together if we do this in a bipartisan way. We can keep the divisive stuff out of this. We're going to need a State Department. We're going to need aid and development. When I got time to spend with my good friend Joe Wilson, every time he says war criminal Putin, it makes me feel really good. But the real work's going to be, I hope President Trump's successful in finding a ceasefire that is good for the Ukrainian people. But we're going to have to do a lot of work diplomatically to then make sure there's an enduring peace. What is rebuilding Ukraine going to look like? When Joe Wilson talks about the butcher Assad, the Syrian people have a real opportunity here, but it is going to take diplomats. It is going to take Democrats, Republicans, a strong diplomatic development corps to give them the best chance at success and peace. So again, I'm not going to ask you questions. Thank you for your service. Thank you for all those foreign service officers. But there's a real opportunity in this disruption. It's not how I would do it. But if we work together as Democrats and Republicans, meet at the 40-yard line, we're going to like some things, we're not going to like some things, but we do this together in this committee, I think we can have a lasting State Department.
Thank you, Representative Barrett. And I'll just comment on your comments as well to say this State Department reauthorization, from building this process in the committee from the ground up, has been about really looking at where this process has been done at this pedantic drumbeat, looking at armed services and saying, how do they get that accomplished every single, Congress? How do they get that done? And make it an expectations that there's not appropriations for armed services without the authorization of armed services going on. Certainly if they can do it with a budget 10 times the size of what our budget is, then we should certainly have the ability to do that with the scope of that for what we have to deal with in terms of programming there. Every member, Republican, Democrat, will have that opportunity to submit their ideas, to a portal for this, to say, this is what I want in a reauthorization. This is what I want to prioritize and deprioritize. And so 100% member-driven process, and the process to build out doing this, what is our focus in doing this, has been to literally hire on staff from armed services because they have that muscle memory of doing that NDAA year after year after year, that we want to say, hey, we need to create that muscle memory of doing that here on Foreign Affairs year after year after year, Congress after Congress. So